to really understand what's going on today, you need to know that, the new economy really it's a new economy. It's basically a whole new set of transactions and things. And if you're not, if you haven't been hired into it, if you're not like sort of like writing code or making podcasts, then you don't really have any grip on the world economy, and you're dependent on just scraps of from here and there. And so who can belong to the world economy? It's kind of interesting, but this information revolution was supposed to abolish space, and it wouldn't matter where any of us live, but it happens to matter a great deal. The thing that makes this a little bit of a hard to see is the fact that we all know, we've all heard of, investment bankers who live in Vail, Colorado, or who live in Cornwall, or who live in, on the French Riviera. That these are better thought of as outposts of these sort of like capital cities and university towns. That's where the economy is. In that economy, who can live in those cities? Louise's thesis, and he used to be an expert on real estate, is that two things happen in France. You get, rich people buy up all the housing stock in a hot neighborhood, and that's something that's happening in London. You know, Stockwell, Clapham. These were pretty modest places. Now they're like some of the richest, neighborhoods in the world. So rich people buy up the entirety of the private housing stock, and then the public housing stock gets taken over culturally by people who are not by the children of immigrants. So it becomes sort of culturally strange to the working class. So the working class kind of gets spit out of these metropolises where the economy is happening. And they wind up, they're not like at the North Pole, okay, but they're like 60 miles away, and it's too far for them to commute, and there's no getting back in. And so then what happens is the people in the metropolises, contemptuous of the people who've been ejected from them, they do things like Macron did to discuss earlier. They say like, well, we want our metropolis to be clean, so we're going to ban diesel. I mean, but these people who've been thrown out, they're now 60 miles away from where, from the global economy. And there's no public transportation where they live. So they need their car as their lifeline, And so you get a process like this. And you basically develop two countries in one country. It's how it comes about that, in the United States, nobody knows, nobody in Washington knows anybody who voted for Trump. And they very sincerely say, look, they say, I didn't vote for Trump. And the nanny who takes care of my children who didn't vote for Trump. And I've talked to all sorts of people, and none of them voted for Trump. So so what's going on? What's going on actually is the people who are outside of the global economy vote for Trump, and the people who are inside of it vote against him. Yeah.
The big question there is, so you can see why, of course, working classes would end up being excluded from these very expensive capitals because of housing becoming more expensive. That makes perfect sense. The big question is why social housing or public housing or whatever you want to call it, government subsidized housing, ends up going disproportionately to migrants and their children. I mean, in London, the skew is extraordinary. It's like half of London social housing is the lead tenant was born overseas. Very, very high proportions. And it does basically mean that there are so few white working class people in social housing in London, particularly in some areas. And it just seems so odd that any government would do such a thing. I mean, to some extent, people don't realise, at least in Britain, people don't realise that this is going on. And I do think it would be very much in reforms interests to inform people this is going on, because I think it would be a really, really incendiary as a political cause. But why would governments do such a thing? Is that
Well,
explained within the theory?
it's funny. That's a hard question, but it's one that I tried to address in my last book, which came out a few years ago, The Age of Entitlement, which is more about, it's kind of like the European book, but it's more about the United States. You know, in a lot of ways, if you have for a real lean, capitalistic society of the sort that we have set up since the 1980s, sort of penniless foreigners are much better workers than natives who are really equipped with rights. You know, I mean, you are too young to remember some of the things that I remember from my childhood, but you know, the layoffs at the at American factories, the British labor unrest leading up to the miners' strike, there was generally a feeling that our working classes had grown. This was widely shared in the middle of the society. The feeling grew that our working classes had just sort of grown so pampered, and that they'd actually priced themselves out of the market. And sort of, people would say, can you believe that a guy who screws rivets at the General Motors factory gets like $80,000 a year? People would say, and he gets 6 weeks of vacation, and it all, unionized labor was much more. It was absurdly overcompensated relative to the kinds of jobs other people had, and so these sort of like these really high salaries and special benefits that the working classes had got, they were resented by that the organized working classes had got. They were resented by other parts of the working classes who voted Reagan and Thatcher into office. And that led to deregulation. Of course, it led to, basically the whole point of offshoring was not taking advantage of sort of efficiencies that were already out there. It was basically fleeing regulation. It was fleeing, high salaries and mandatory benefits for workers, because, you could build a car with $10,000 a year employees. You didn't need $80,000 a year employees. And so all these jobs went. And now, what did we have? Everything. I mean, the two great deindustrialized societies are the United States and Britain. So what do we have now? We have a society in which you're either investing or you're making other people's coffee. Now, if your average working class person is someone who's making other people's coffee for close to minimum wage, actually, who do you want in that job? Do you want some old guy who used to make $80,000 or 40,000 pounds a year screwing rivets, and he's really resentful that he now has to serve people? He who used to be an independent yeoman in the world, used to have used to be able to stand on his own 2 feet, now does this servile thing, and he's not happy with it. Or do you want the guy who comes from, Poland or Morocco or wherever, and it's like, wow, 10 pounds an hour for this, that's good money. I'm really happy to be here. So the immigrant is, it's sort of like a, one of these biblical type paradoxes. The immigrant is a better native than the native. The immigrant is more useful to Britain as it's officially thought of by the government than the old Cockney. And it's the same in the United States.
Yeah. It's just class warfare, basically.
Or no warfare. It's just I don't really see the evidence. I see the beginnings of warfare in some of these votes, in like in the Trump vote and the Brexit vote, and but I don't really see, any that the excluded have really been able to make a dent in the system.